What's up, cum muffins? It's your boy Yank Spanky. Let's just fucking get into it. If you're one of the 4 people still playing Borderlands 4, then you know about Gearbox's current obsession with adding timers to endgame content. The 2 standalone raid bosses have timers, world events have timers, Ordonite Processors have timers, and just recently was announced that the upcoming Takedown is also going to have a timer, which if my scheduling works out should be releasing the same day that this video comes out, so we'll see how that turns out. Literally every single new piece of major endgame content released into this game post-launch has had a timer tied to it, and I want to spend some time yapping about it, because boss, I'm getting fucking tired. We'll start out with the least egregious of the timers out of the previously listed endgame activities, the world events. There's 3 of these, and for the most part, I think that the timers here are actually done quite well. These activities aren't a major source of any loot, and more so just fun endgame activities to run when they appear. And while personally, I think they're kinda lame for the most part, the timers here serve to increase your reward for obtaining faster clear times with silver, gold, and platinum rewards being available. The completion time requirement for the highest tier of reward is pretty achievable for almost any decent build, more so requiring mastery of the mobbing mechanics rather than an absolutely perfected build. Whoa there, what's that? Holy shit, it's the Remember That Line bell! World event timers get a pass here, and considering their base game and therefore the first instance of a timed event, it's really shocking just how downhill it all is from here. Next up is the Ordonite Processor event, added alongside the release of the Stone Demon Bounty Pack as a method for obtaining the pearlescent weapons added in the same bounty pack. You're given 4 minutes upon activation, during which waves of enemies will spawn. Some of these enemies are labeled load-bearing, which when killed will drop an Ordonite chunk for you to toss into the processor. Throw in enough and an Ordonite-infused enemy will spawn with a chance at dropping a pearlescent or a shastra. Each time you spawn an Ordonite enemy, the required Ordonite for the next to spawn is increased with a maximum of 3 spawns per activation. However, at only 4 minutes, unless optimized specifically for these events, you're likely only to get 2 spawns per run. Though I've even seen people that straight up opt to reset after a single Ordonite kill just to save time, because sometimes even the second spawn can be inconsistent to get if you're screwed over by RNG. This is why a vast majority of those that farm this event choose to do so through the mission replay for Stone Demon, where instead of 4 minutes you get an Ordonite Processor event with a 10-minute timer, making it actually consistent to be able to get all 3 possible spawns per run. This timer is just frustrating. It's still far from the worst offender, since the only thing tied to this is how many drop chances you get for your spent iridium per activation, but it being as short as it is makes it so that not only do you need to be running a build that is able to mob and take out Ordonite infused enemies quickly, but even if you are, sometimes you still get screwed over by spawns or just the time it takes to find, grapple, and toss the Ordonite into the processor. Each stage takes 3, 5, and then 7 Ordonite to process. If we're probably conservative and say that it takes 2 seconds to grab and deposit each crystal at 15 total needed crystals, then that already eats up 30 seconds of your 4 minutes, which is excluding the time that it takes to find and kill the load-bearing enemies, the time between waves, and the time that it takes for the Ordonite infused to actually spawn in and then be killed. A lot of that timer is wasted by factors outside of your control, especially when the Ordonite itself is a physics object that can be knocked around and roll away. As I said, while this one isn't terrible, it does make for an excessively frustrating experience all around. It creates a Sisyphusian task where almost everything is working against you while you're being timed out of a piece of content that itself isn't really that hard and is rather easy when you have 10 minutes to do it, as shown by Stone Demon. This is definition artificial difficulty. Oh look, there's that bell again. But now I think is when it gets genuinely bad, when it becomes a real issue to the health of the game as a whole, when they added timers to raid bosses with silver, gold, and platinum rewards depending on how fast you're able to kill the boss. Each rank gives you an additional reward chest at the end of your kill, each able to drop the raid's associated loot, so a faster completion means more potential pulls for drops. However, with platinum completion specifically, you get a unique chest. For the first raid boss, Bloom Reaper, the platinum chest is the only way to obtain the legendary Rainmaker. For Subjugator and Fall, this was alleviated a bit, as the platinum chest will simply have a chance to drop whatever item is associated to the loot pool of the boss that you didn't kill to complete your run. So if you completed a platinum kill going the Thal route, the chest may give you Subjugator's drop and vice versa. The issue is that these phases are so incredibly unbalanced from each other, with Thaw being significantly easier, and due to Subjugator's adaptive Elemental Eater effect during his second phase, some builds are completely unable to even take that route, meaning that in some cases, Subjugator's drops are still only available through the Platinum completion time. This serves to lock people out of raid-specific reward pools or even specific pieces of loot if their build isn't perfectly optimized despite still killing the boss. As well, it not only cheapens the satisfaction of getting a non-plat kill, but I think it's probably making the raid boss mechanics in this game a hell of a lot less interesting, because the main mechanic you're contending with is the timer rather than the boss itself. Bloom Reaper's most major mechanics are the initial crystal phase and the fact that you're floating over a pit, while Subjugator and Thaw's mechanics are designed to be interacted with as minimally as possible on your way to a plat. Even just mechanically, they aren't really all that much more interesting than a generic boss. There's nothing that drastically alters gameplay or how you have to engage with the fight, because that constantly ticking timer means that you are going for speed over all else. And the bosses themselves seem to be designed with that in mind as the determining factor of how the fight is going to alter your gameplay. Though I think the real question is what actually came first here. Do we have lazy raid bosses because of a timer, or do we have a timer because they want to be lazy with the raid bosses? Who knows? It doesn't actually matter, because like the Matrix, we're stuck in this shit and we can't get out. With that all being said, timers themselves are not inherently bad. As I said with the base game world events, they're actually pretty good. And taking an example from BL3, the trials or proving grounds were also timed content that I think was an amazing use of timers. The key differences with those timers versus those being tied to raids or even just the Ordonite Processors is that they weren't nearly as restrictive. Getting a 5-minute completion in a trial was doable for pretty much any build through gameplay optimization. However, even falling under that 5-minute mark, the boss itself at the end is most of the time what you were running trials for, with the time completion only affecting the loot quality of the 4 drops you get from the end chest, effectively being a bonus reward more than anything, because that chest was always just world drops. Again, the specific loot tied to the content dropped from the boss itself, so you always had the same chance at the loot that you were likely running the content for, no matter completion time or build optimization. Comparatively, getting a plat on an endgame raid boss in Borderlands 4 requires a near-perfect build and gives you more drop chances on raid-specific loot. And in a game like BL4 with very strict requirements already for builds, this makes an already incredibly restrictive experience even more restrictive. These timers are creating meta compression without any sort of compensation, because what's one of the other major issues plaguing BL4 right now? That's right, a massive lack of effort towards actually balancing the game. The strongest gear at launch is still the strongest now 9 months later. The strongest strategies at launch are still the strongest strategies 9 months later. The game is still run by AMP, Splonchers, Groundbreaker, and specific licensed parts, and some of the more off-meta options are now already being phased further and further out of relevancy by UVH levels, true mode, and timers on raid bosses restricting the gear that we get. For timers to work in this game, there would need to be a strong, diverse, foundational meta, which there just isn't. I also think that these timers don't really do much other than add artificial difficulty into endgame content that should just be difficult on its own merits. Wotan, Scourge, Hemovorus, Haterax, Veracitus, the Dragons, Cromarax. Raid bosses in previous games didn't reward you based on timers, they rewarded you based on just surviving through the damn thing. Congratulations, you just completed some of the toughest content available to you. I don't care how you did it or how long it took you, you fucking did it and you deserve to be rewarded as such. Back in the day when I first beat Wotan, it took me tons of attempts and I ended up queuing into online lobbies to run it with other people while I got a feel for how the boss worked. When he finally died for the first time, I was rewarded with tons of loot for my efforts, even though it was the ugliest, dirtiest kill ever. I struggled to get that first kill. It was an uphill battle, I had to learn the fight choreography, and when I finally did, I got a huge, satisfying loot explosion. And you know what I did after that? I kept running running it back over and over and over all night until I got better at the fight and optimized my build further. By my own choice. There wasn't any reason for me to. There was no big red sign that said, platinum here, hey, reach this goal to get a platinum. Outside of learning to break Wotan's legs for even more loot, nothing was being withheld from me for not being fast enough or good enough or optimal enough. But the fight itself being hard and fun and engaging and rewarding, that made me want to complete it cleaner and faster. It made me want to engage with the fight more and deeper. The game didn't have to demand I do it to get the full reward available from it while fucking over certain builds and playstyles in doing so. And finally here, I want to take this as an opportunity to talk about clear speeds being a metric used often when discussing Borderlands 3's meta and what it almost feels like these timers were a direct response to. Simply put, it's the metric of how fast something can clear through a piece of content, being equivalent to a speedrun category and being totally fine in that. The problem I find with it, and that you will likely run into if you've ever discussed the meta of Borderlands 3 with anyone that thinks that they know better than you, clear speeds are very likely to come up as a metric of what defines something as good or better than something else. The problem with this idea is that it almost entirely ignores any of the context that goes into what actually defines power level. Aim, enemy spawns, player consistency, other RNG factors present in these games, non-DPS related factors that a certain build might sacrifice DPS in favor of, type of content you're comparing on, certain optimizations that make specific weapons or weapon types function better, and probably a million more. All of these factor heavily into why something might outperform something else when only looking at this one metric, similar to thinking the best build is just the one that does the absolute most damage possible. But most importantly, this is a metric that in general does not apply to a vast majority of players. This is a metric determined by the best of the best builds that are optimized purely for clearing the specific content that they are running as fast as possible, with these runs often being performed by people who have spent way more time than a huge amount of the players ever will on those specific pieces of content. When clear speeds get paraded around as the end-all be-all of power level to more casual players looking for a bit of optimization for their specific build, then you end up with someone running a build through a random piece of content with a timer, comparing the times they get with different guns or gear, and ignoring all that previously mentioned context that clear speeds don't account for, while also not performing nearly at the same level as the people that set those clear speed world records. And the funniest part about it, this metric only even functions at all because there's certain things that are completely banned from competing within it. Otherwise, clear speeds would be completely overrun by everyone using splash radius in a complex route to screen wipe everything perpetually. If your meta-defining category requires bans to not completely fall apart and be next to worthless as anything other than a speedrun category, to me, that shows that it's way too fragile to actually be taken seriously. And unfortunately, this is now effectively the way that Borderlands 4 is currently determining what builds are able to even be viable at endgame. If your build is not the best of the best, then you get rewarded less than other people. The challenge is no longer the content itself, but rather how fast you can get through the content. Your goal isn't to experience the content, rather your goal is to experience as little of it as possible, as fast as possible. Optimize beyond fun, optimize beyond challenge, get your Splancher and Groundbreaker anything that poses a threat to get your platinum time so you get the rewards that should have been earned by anyone with whatever build that they find fun. This upcoming Takedown might be amazing. It might be a beautifully designed map, have incredibly cool and mechanically intense boss fights, and some super awesome and unique weapons. But what's the point when the goal that's laid out in front of you by the game itself is to just beat it as fast as possible? How are you supposed to enjoy these bosses, the scenery, the enemies? How are you supposed to experiment with new, unique, and fun builds that might be less optimal but more enjoyable to you? You're not. You're just supposed to get a platinum. But of course, that's just my thoughts on the matter. What about you? Do you agree with my thoughts here? Do you disagree and think that timers are actually good? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. That's gonna about do it for this one though. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all of that. I'll be live right after this video goes up, right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel, where there'll be a link to down in the description below, checking out the new Takedown that's hopefully coming out today. And just below that will be a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.